The most regretted hunting rifle brand in America costs over $2,000. The most trusted one costs under $1,000. Hunters decided both of those, not me. I just counted. The money is going one direction and the trust is going the other. And it's been that way in public for years, in threads anybody can read. If you hunt and you'd rather hear this before you spend the money instead of after, subscribe. That's the whole pitch. Every brand in this video was put there by hunters who volunteered it to strangers for free without anybody asking. Close to 200 of them in a single comment section. Dozens of threads on Rokslide, Hunt Talk, long-range hunting, 24-hour campfire, accurate shooter, predator masters, 6 years of it. Nobody was polled, nobody was prompted, and nobody had a rifle mailed to them to review, which is why this beats a magazine test. A man who paid for his own rifle 4 years ago and is still angry about it has nothing to sell you. It's sentiment, not a defect rate. And where I've got something harder than sentiment, a court record, a recall, a filing, you'll hear the difference. 3 brands own the regret side, 3 own the trust side. And at the end, where on the price ladder the improvements stop, because the answer is lower than you think. Let's start with the one that's going to get me the angriest comments. Number 3 is Savage, and I already know how this goes, because I watched it happen to somebody else. Put Savage on a worst list, and the defense comes in like a wall. The top comment defending them, 655 people agreed with it, is a man saying he owns 3 Savage Axis rifles, that he isn't rich, that he's got a family to feed, and that those guns have filled his freezer for over a decade without a problem. Right behind him is a hunter with a 25-year-old Model 110 his whole family has taken deer with. Behind him, a guy running 3 Axis rifles in 3 calibers, all shooting under a minute of angle. So I'm not here to tell you Savage builds bad rifles. The people who own them will bury me, and they'd be right. What repeats is narrower. It sits on the budget line and it's consistent. Rough bolt lift, thin flexible stocks, a few reports of light primer strikes out of the box. One hunter describes accuracy problems he traced to the factory stock, then does the math out loud. A replacement stock costs about what the whole rifle cost, which is the real shape of the Axis complaint. It's a rifle people love after they've spent money making it into a different rifle. But that's not why Savage is on this list. A $250 rifle behaving like a $250 rifle isn't a scandal. That's a price tag doing its job. Savage is here because of one owner who bought 2 of them. An $800 impulse that grouped half a minute of angle with hand loads, which he says he never had to touch, and a $2,400 Klim, wearing a premium barrel that wouldn't group at all. He pulled it apart looking for the reason and found the action screws loose. Tightened them and it started grouping, badly, for the money. Kept digging and found the scope rail loose too. His conclusion, in his own words, was that it was funny the $800 gun had the better quality control. One man, one report. I can't verify it, and it isn't a return rate, so hold it loosely. Hold on to it though, because that same shape is about to happen twice more, at higher prices, and by the 3rd time, it stops looking like luck. Number 2 is Remington, and the answer here depends entirely on one thing: what year your rifle was born. Ask hunters about old Remingtons and you get love letters. A man walks you through a pawn shop in 1983, 12 years old, standing next to his father, looking at a Model 700 in 243 on the rack for $175. His dad asked if that was really the price. He walked out with his first deer rifle. He still shoots it, still says it's the best shooter he owns, and ends by wishing his father were around to watch him use it. 278 people upvoted that. Then there's the one that turns nostalgia into evidence. A hunter says he owns 3 Model 700s, and everyone groups minute of angle or better, and then adds, unprompted, that all 3 were bought before 1980. Now, ask about the new ones. The most upvoted complaint in everything I read, 559 people deep, comes from a man with 65 years of hunting behind him. Worst rifle he ever owned, a Remington 700 made last year. He gave it to his least favorite son-in-law. That's sentiment, and sentiment can be rose-tinted. Old guns get remembered kindly because the misses fade. So let's go somewhere sentiment can't reach. Remington entered a class action settlement covering trigger mechanisms across a long list of models: the 700, the Model 7, the 710, the 715, the 770, others sharing a trigger connector. Separately, The company ran a voluntary recall on X-Mark Pro triggers built between May of 2006 and April of 2014. The suit was filed in 2013. Final approval came in 2017. Reportedly, once the appeal window closed, refunds were offered covering more than 7.5 million rifles. Remington denied there was a design defect, and that denial belongs in the record just as much as the settlement does. Then the company itself came apart, and this part is all public paperwork. Remington Outdoor Company filed for bankruptcy in 2020 and got sold off in pieces at a court-supervised auction. The long gun business went to Round Hill Group for $13 million and operates now as Arms. Ammunition went to Vista Outdoor. Marlin went to Sturm, Ruger & Company for roughly $28.3 million, paid in cash on hand. 4 years later, in March of 2024, the plant in Ilion, New York, shut down after generations of operation, 309 jobs, and production moved to LaGrange, Georgia. The chief executive pointed at the cost of keeping very old buildings running and at the legislative climate in the state. Here's why I laid that out in that much detail, and it's probably not the reason you expect. Not one of those sentences says the rifles got worse. A bankruptcy is a financial event, not a quality report. Moving a factory across state lines is not a defect. If I stood here and told you your Remington declined because of a private equity firm and a courthouse in Alabama, I'd be selling you a story the record doesn't support, and you should be suspicious of anybody who does. What the record does support is quieter and more useful. The company that built your father's rifle doesn't exist in that form anymore. The name has survived 3 owners and a state line. Whether the rifle survived intact is exactly what hunters are arguing about, and it's why the same brand shows up on both lists in the same conversation. Number 1 is Christensen Arms, and it's the only name where everything I looked at pointed the same direction. Rokslide has accuracy threads on it running multiple pages, going back years. Northwest Firearms has one titled, without decoration, Accuracy Problems. The company's own review page carries hundreds of entries. And in a comments section where people were arguing about everything, the largest independent rifle testing channel on the platform, over 1 million subscribers, a man who buys and shoots dozens of rifles a year, showed up in public to say he'd rank some brands below Savage, but that he agrees Christensen doesn't have a good reputation for quality. The report that stopped me came from someone who says he sold firearms at a big-name outfitter, everything from budget guns up to very high-end. In his telling, Christensen was by far the most returned rifle they carried. He puts the ratio at somewhere around 14 or 15 of theirs coming back for every one of anything else, and calls that a conservative estimate. Be careful with that number, and I mean it. That's one man, one store, working from memory, estimating. It is not a return rate. It's not data, and neither of us can check it. I'm using it as a voice, not as a measurement. Because when I went looking for the other side, I found something more interesting than the accusation. The defenders outnumber the critics. A competitive shooter reports 3 Mesa rifles in 6.5 PRC, all of them grouping under 3/4 of a minute, and says he shoots year-round. 2 separate owners of the Evoke, the cheap end of the catalog, report sub-minute of angle, one of them adding that customer service picked up immediately both times he called. Someone else has a CA5V6 that he says drives tax. One man took a deer at 740 yards with his and thinks people are trashing the company on purpose. So if this many owners are happy, how is this brand number 1? Look at what the happy ones are holding. Mesa, Evoke, CA5V6, steel barrels, lower and middle shelves. Now look at where the complaints land, and it's the Ridgeline over and over, the carbon fiber flagship, the expensive one. 2 different hunters in that thread asked the same question out loud, and nobody answered either of them. How did the complaints split between the carbon-barreled rifles and the steel ones? They'd noticed something and couldn't confirm it. I can't confirm it either. Nobody has that data and the company isn't publishing it. But read a few hundred of these back to back, and the 2 piles sort themselves by barrel material and by price. They sort backwards from what you paid for, and the single best piece of evidence for it is written by a man defending the rifle. He owns a Ridgeline. He really likes it. He'll explain to you, patiently, that people expect too much because the design was built around weight, not around inherent accuracy, which is true, and which the company would probably agree with. Then he tells you what owning it looked like. His worst groups ran over 6 inches at 100 yards. He bought more than $300 of ammunition working through options until he found 2 loads that would break a minute. With the right one, he's under half a minute and delighted. And then comes the sentence that ends the argument, still on the company's side. Most people wouldn't put that kind of money into finding the right load, but he refused to believe a $2,000 plus rifle was a complete loss. That's the defense. $300 in ammunition and sheer stubbornness stacked on top of a $2,000 rifle to arrive at the accuracy printed on the box. And the company knows the conversation exists. This part is on the record, not in a thread. Christensen Arms was acquired by Encore Capital Partners in August of 2019, alongside KLV Capital. Control moved out of the founding family's hands and to a chairman brought in by the buyers. Then, in July of 2025, the company named a new president, the former chief executive of one of the largest firearms retailers in the country. In the announcement, the chairman explained the hire by pointing at the man's industry knowledge and, in the company's own words, his deep respect for the customer experience. I'm not going to tell you why they said that. It's their sentence, not mine. But when a rifle company brings in a retailer to run the business and puts customer experience in the press release, somebody upstairs has read the same threads I did. If you've owned any rifle in this video, drop the model in the comments. The model, not the brand. That distinction is the reason this video exists, and it's the thing nobody's keeping track of. Because here's what ties all 3 of these together, and it isn't quality control. Every one of these rifles was sold with a number on the box. Sub-minute of angle, half-minute. A guarantee, printed in writing, sold to you as a feature the way a trigger or a barrel contour is a feature. That's the product, not the steel, the promise. And a promise is a strange thing to pay for, because the only day you find out what it's worth is the day it fails. Set that against how these rifles are built. The complaints stack up on ultralight carbon-barreled magnums, and that is the hardest combination in the catalog to make shoot consistently. It's not even a secret. The owner I just quoted said it himself. Thin barrels heat quickly. Hot barrels walk. Light rifles are less forgiving of the man behind them. There's a hunter in one of these threads describing slow-motion footage of an early Ruger American barrel visibly flexing under recoil, worse as it warmed. That's physics. Nobody did anything wrong. So the industry took the configuration that's hardest to make consistent, bolted the most aggressive accuracy guarantee in the business onto it, priced it north of $2,000, and shipped it. Then what actually happens when it misses the number? You pay the shipping. You wait. Though one owner sent his back, was assured it was fine, and reports it failed to eject on the very first shot after it came home. Another sent his in and had it back in 2 weeks with nothing but praise for how he was treated. Both of those are true simultaneously, and that's exactly the problem. The outcome is a coin flip, and you're the one holding the coin in October. Now, the number that should decide how you spend your money. The largest independent accuracy database I'm aware of, built by that same testing channel out of dozens of rifles he bought himself, reports no correlation between price and accuracy across factory hunting rifles. None. On average, in that data, spending more does not buy you tighter groups, which tells you what the money above roughly $1,000 is buying: saved ounces, better finish, and a printed number. The first 2 are real, and you can hold them. The third is a story about a rifle, and it's only worth anything on the day the rifle fails to live up to it. That's the machine. Here's who beat it. Ruger takes third on the trust side, and it only makes sense if you split the lines apart, because Ruger shows up on both lists depending on which rifle you're pointing at. The complaints are specific. Early Americans drew reports of thin barrels heating and flexing. The Predator gets singled out. That same retail seller from earlier recommends the Standard over it by name, saying the Standard has a better barrel and a better lockup, and that out of the box, it holds up against rifles costing 4 to 6 times more. Second-generation Americans read far better than first-generation ones. None of that is why Ruger is here. Ruger is here because of what happens when something breaks. 4 people, independently, in the same conversation, told versions of one story. A man asked for scope mount screws for a number 1, and later a whole butt plate for a Model 77, and got both free. His own note is that they didn't have to, and did it anyway. Another inherited a 40-year-old firearm, broke apart, contacted Ruger, and had a replacement inside a month on a gun that hasn't been made in decades. A third says the company would rather pay to have you send it in than push you toward a gunsmith. The fourth has run a 25-year-old Model 77 so long without trouble that he's never had to find out. You cannot read that off a spec sheet or feel it at the counter, and it's worth more over 20 years than a tenth of a minute of angle. Fair is fair, so here's the counterweight, and it's blunt. One hunter lists internal magazines that wouldn't feed at capacity, zeros that wandered every time the humidity changed, and says tech support was always delighted to have him ship it in and never once fixed a single thing. Not one, he says. He's finished with the brand, so it isn't universal. It's just repeated by enough unconnected people to earn the spot, carried by the Hawkeye, the Standard, the second-generation American, and hardest of all by the old Model 77s. Second place goes to a brand a lot of people never wrote down because they don't know they already recommended it. Howa, and the Weatherby Vanguard that carries the same action. Most buyers have no idea. The barreled action inside a Weatherby Vanguard is built by Howa Machinery in Japan. Weatherby does final assembly in Sheridan, Wyoming. The Howa branded rifles come into the country through a separate importer in Nevada. One action, 2 badges, 2 different shelves of the store. Weatherby publishes a sub-minute of angle guarantee on the Vanguard, 3 shots, cold barrel, premium ammunition, honored for the original buyer. That is the same printed number the $2,000 rifles on the regret list were selling you. Here it's bolted to a rifle that has sold for well under $1,000, and the owners back it up. A Vanguard in 2506 gets called the best value its owner ever bought. Smooth action, tack driver, and 146 people agreed with him. One family runs 7 Howa pattern rifles across different calibers and configurations, all of them excellent, and the man who counted them points out they cost less than a Tikka. Another built 2 Howa barreled actions into chassis for under $1,000 total and shoots them to 700 yards on off-the-shelf ammunition. An older hunter, with more than 80 firearms in the safe, names his Howas and Vanguards among the most reliable things he's owned. There is one complaint. Exactly one. And it's the sentence that proves everything I've been telling you. A man reports his Vanguard backcountry, the ultralight model, the one with the thin, fluted barrel, getting roaring hot and throwing horrible groups after 2 or 3 shots. The ultralight one. Sitting inside a brand nobody complains about, at 1/3 of the price of a Ridgeline, doing exactly what the Ridgeline does. Same failure, same configuration, every price point, every company in this video. Which brings us to the one hunters put first, by a margin nothing else came close to. Tikka, around 35 separate people in a single comment section, all saying a version of the same sentence. The most upvoted comment in the entire conversation, 775 people, is a joke. He regrets buying a Tikka because he should have bought one 20 years sooner. One hunter owns 6 and trusts all 6. Another owns 4 and explains how he got there. Every time a rifle fails him in the field, he trades it in on a Tikka, and the problem never comes back. Somebody else picked one up in a store, spent 1 minute researching it on his phone, bought it, and now it's what he reaches for when the shot matters. The praise is oddly specific, which is what makes it credible. It's the same 3 things every time. The action is smooth. It shoots under an inch with factory ammunition, out of the box, with no break-in ritual, and it lands around $1,000. They're also not perfect, and it's the owners who say so, in the middle of complimenting them. The stocks are cheap plastic and they flex. Put a big Magnum in a light one, and the recoil comes straight back at you. The magazines take criticism constantly. Polymer, 3 rounds, loose in the well. There's a hunter in southeast Alaska who had 1 drop out of his rifle while pushing through miles of brush, which is a hunt-ending failure, not an inconvenience. One man sent a rifle in and describes getting nothing done, slowly, until a local gunsmith solved it in 2 weeks. And a guy who borescopes barrels for a living says the machining inside, particularly around the throat, is not what the reputation would lead you to expect. Sit with that list for a second, because it's the ending. The most trusted hunting rifle in America is not light. It's not carbon. The stock is cheap enough that its own owners apologize for it before you can bring it up. It costs about $1,000, and there is no number printed on the box. This was never about which manufacturer is careful and which one is careless. Hunters rank the rifle that promised them nothing above every rifle that promised them a guarantee. And they did it while listing its flaws out loud. So, what do you do with it? If you want the best odds of a rifle that shoots out of the box and never gives you a story worth telling, the community verdict is a standard weight Tikka or a Howa pattern rifle, ordinary chambering, steel barrel, normal contour, $600 to $1,000. That's the knee in the curve. Above it, you're buying ounces, finish, and a promise. Below it, you're buying a rifle that will probably shoot fine and might want a stock or a trigger, which is precisely what those happy Axis owners did on purpose, and they'd tell you it was worth it. If you want the ultralight carbon rifle anyway, and there are honest reasons to want one, because the man packing 8 miles at altitude isn't being vain about it. Go in with your eyes open. Plan on load development, not a load. Put ammunition money in the budget alongside the rifle. Expect the barrel to walk as it heats, and shoot it accordingly. None of that is a defect. That's the configuration you chose. The problem was never the physics. The problem is selling the physics as a guarantee. And if you're sitting there with one that shoots beautifully, you're not wrong, and I'm not arguing. Plenty of people in every one of these threads have a Ridgeline or a Fierce, or a brand new Remington that does everything they ask of it. The pattern doesn't say your rifle is bad. It says the odds you were buying weren't the odds you were sold. One more name, because it kept turning up, and it deserves the same treatment as the rest. Fierce Firearms landed on the regret side of nearly every list I read. What's strange is that almost nobody criticizing it appears to own one. The complaints are second-hand, reputation echoing around, people repeating what they've heard. That's worth saying out loud because a brand can get buried by a reputation it didn't earn, and I'm not going to help do that. What I can put on the table is verifiable. Fierce was founded in 2013 in Gunnison, Utah, by a man who had previously served as president of Christensen Arms. Christensen is also in Gunnison, Utah. Same town, same carbon fiber ultralight category, higher prices. I'm not going to tell you what that means. I'm telling you it's on the record, and you can run the arithmetic yourself. An $800 rifle shot half an inch. A $2,400 rifle turned up with the screws loose. Everything after that was watching the same thing repeat at bigger and bigger numbers. And in 6 years of hunters volunteering what they regret, not one of them regretted the rifle that never promised them anything. They regret the one that came with the number printed on the box. If you want to see the same trick run with a logo instead of a guarantee, that video's on the channel.